Hello and welcome back to Taboo Talks with me, Beth Ennis.
And me, Catherine Daniels.
This is our monthly podcast where we discuss the topics that we've been covering. This month we've been busy looking into flat earth theorists, Shamima Begum, abortion and political engagement. We've had a few comments from you that we're looking forward to discussing, but keep sending your comments in to our social media channels or email us at contact.us.taboo@gmail.com. So let's get straight into it. Catherine has written a feature about flat earth theory this month. Tell us more about that.
So I've had some quite interesting conversations, it's safe to say. I spoke to a flat earth theorist via Twitter and I spoke to an astrophysics lecturer at the University of Lincoln. And I think flat earth theory is one of those interesting topics where there's some people with quite out there opinions, and it's actually quite interesting to sort of dig a bit deeper and find out why they think the way they do. So to just get into it, the flat earth that I spoke to was called Dr. Lee, and he runs a Twitter account called Flat Earthers, and this is what he had to say. 70% of the earth is covered in water, and for the globe model to work, those large oceans have to curve around a ball. No experiment has ever demonstrated large bodies of water curving or sticking to a spinning ball.
So those are quite interesting comments. What did you make of that?
Well, I was a bit taken aback, to be honest, because I think it's I myself thought it was fairly self-evident that gravity does play a part in this. Obviously, the gravitational forces pulling the water down. I mean, I'm no scientist, but to me, that seems to make sense. But when I put it to Dr. Lee, he said that he's seen no evidence that gravity exists, and the forces at work are instead buoyancy and density, which I thought was actually an interesting way to put it, seeing as the astrophysicist I spoke to essentially said that that is gravity. But on the topic of gravity, this is what Dr. Phil Sutton at the University of Lincoln had to say.
It's a good question, because actually there's two ways in which we see it. We can see it as a bending of space, which is not an easy way to visualise it, which is general relativity, or you can think of it as like an actual force. So if we take that analogy, we can say that any two objects, or any object that has a mass, will exert a gravitational force on everything else around it. The further away you are, that force decreases quite significantly. The bigger the mass, the bigger the gravity. So when you start to get big objects like planets, they have a fairly significant amount of gravity, and the mass is in the centre, so it basically smooths out the surface and creates these spherical shapes.
So there Dr. Sutton is saying that gravity is at play in the sense that it's pulling the mass of the Earth together, and that's actually what makes the Earth itself round. So obviously gravity is such a big force in our daily lives, in Earth, in the way that planets are formed. And I just think it's quite odd that these flat earthers are saying that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, I'd maybe give the argument a bit more credence if they could present a reason that politicians or NASA have to lie about it and what they could possibly gain from it. I can't think of anything to be gained from lying about the fact that the Earth is round. Obviously, there's plenty of pictures and photos and footage of the Earth showing that it is round, and I know that some theorists claim that those are false or made up or made using Photoshop, but I just don't believe that at all. I think it's a really strange theory.
Well, yeah, picking up on that, Dr. Lee said to me that pictures of the Earth, it's all CGI, it's false, and he said that NASA would lie about the Earth being round because they don't want to lose money, which I think, like you said, it's quite an odd thing. Like, why would anyone have anything to gain from lying about it? It's one of those principles that it's been accepted for sort of hundreds of years that the Earth is round. Ever since sort of ancient Greek philosophers, they've said the Earth is a globe, this is what it looks like. They sort of managed to measure the curvature of the Earth, the circumference of the Earth, things like that. And for somebody just to come along and say, well, actually, I can't see that it exists, just seems a bit bizarre. It's just like they're brushing all the scientific evidence under the carpet and saying, well, no, that's not what I think. But they don't present anything substantial to say otherwise.
It's interesting because there's a lot of conspiracy theories like that nowadays where you think, these people are kind of angry at what has been said and don't believe it, but what is the reason they don't believe it? It must have been really interesting to speak to a conspiracy theorist and try to work out why they believe that what we have been told from like a young age and what we're told by scientists and politicians is wrong.
Well, yeah, that's quite interesting to talk about because it's something that they didn't actually answer in a straightforward way. When I sort of asked, well, why do you believe in flat earth theory? They just said, well, it's observable reality. And then when you sort of delve deeper and try and question what observable reality is, the answers I got were a bit sort of woolly, and it wasn't sort of avoiding the point.
I mean, if they're avoiding the point, it kind of begs the question, you know, how far does their conspiracy go? Do they really have evidence to back it up, or is it just something that they've decided to believe without really basing it on fact?
And one of the things that I did pick up on was they were saying that scientists are making extraordinary claims, and to back up their claims they need to provide extraordinary evidence. And I asked then, well, where's your extraordinary evidence? And then they said, well, I'm not the one making the claim. They need to back up their claims that the Earth is a globe. So it just...
kind of just powering it off and not really answering the question. I think maybe one of the things that's really interesting about anything to do with space is that it is so hard to get your head round and understand because it's such a massive thing. Like, obviously it takes years of research to even begin to understand. So I think sometimes because people don't understand it, they kind of don't believe what we're told because they're like, oh, how could that possibly be true? How can the universe be infinite? Like, they just don't understand, so they question it.
I mean, that's a fair point because it is hard to know what is actually out there, and obviously scientists have done their research and they can make guesses and estimations based on what they can see. But for somebody who doesn't study science and doesn't know a whole lot other than sort of GCSE level physics about the Earth, like I do, it can be a hard concept to sort of get your head around and actually understand the magnitude of space and how much is out there. But for me personally, I can see the evidence and I see no reason not to believe what the scientists are telling us.
Exactly. I'm not a scientist myself, so I can't begin to understand why the Earth is round, but I'll happily leave it to the scientists to inform me on what's going on and what is the case, unless someone can present a valid argument that they would be lying, and I can't see that here.
Well, this topic has certainly caused some debate over on our social media accounts, with over 160 of you sending us in your comments. So unfortunately we can't talk about everybody's comments today, but we've chosen a few to bring up. So one from Admani said, that's a great thing about science. You don't have to agree for something to be true. Science does not care about your feelings.
And we also had one from Tom Beattie, who said that the fact that there's actually people who truly believe in the flat earth theory in 2019 is just ridiculous.
And Pitbull_mob said, if these scientists and explorers decided that the Earth was a globe a long time ago, then why were the first maps of the Earth flat?
Dave Cornett said, not a believer in flat earth but willing to listen. How do you explain it not being sunny or dark over the entire world if it's flat? I need convincing.
And finally, Harley_dog said, the fact that the Earth is a globe shouldn't be in doubt by anyone. It's been shown to be in countless photographs from space. Flat Earth is just a fad and will be a distant memory in a few years. Now, some of these comments that we had were quite interesting, and there was a whole range of opinions. So thanks to everybody who sent in your comments, and if you've got any other comments or opinions on flat earth theory, then do send them in to us. The usual methods: you can tweet us, Facebook us, or send us an email. So that about wraps things up for flat earth theory, and now we want to move on to our next topic. So you might have noticed that this month we introduced a new section to the website called Topical Taboo. These pieces are sort of current affairs-y, they're a bit more controversial things in the news, and they're produced by both of us, so we just look at topics that we think are getting a lot of attention.
So this time we've started off with Shamima Begum because this is something that's really got people talking about whether or not she should be allowed to return to the UK. Obviously we've had the recent news update that her child has sadly passed away. We're not 100% sure on this as it hasn't been confirmed as of yet. But as I said, there's been different arguments put forward online and we've explored some of them in our piece.
So let's take a look at some of the points arguing that she should actually return to the UK and be allowed to return. So one of the main arguments was she was only 15 when she left the UK. She's a UK citizen, and why are we as a country making her another country's problem? Because she is a citizen of the UK, so surely she should be the UK's responsibility. And should she actually come back and face justice in the UK?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting argument. I think that's actually probably the whole basis of my opinion on it. Why leave another country to deal with her? She is the product of the UK. She was radicalised here. She moved away from here to join ISIS. So I definitely think that we should deal with that. I know it's kind of a crude way to put it, but it's our mess, so we should clean it up. Why leave it to another country? It's completely unfair. So at the very least, she should come back here to face justice, in my opinion.
And then obviously you've got the ethical points of it as well, like actually is it fair to remove somebody's citizenship? And I think that's another really big issue to consider, and I do agree with what you said. I think that she should have to face some form of justice in the UK.
So going back to the argument that some people do say that she was only 15 when she left and she didn't really realise what she was doing, I do completely disagree with that. That's one part of the argument that I can't agree with, because I think 15, although, yeah, it is a young age, I think it's old enough to know not to go and join a terrorist organisation. I just think it's a very bizarre argument to say she didn't understand what she was doing. And obviously we've seen some more recent interviews with her, and even though she does very vaguely express some type of remorse, I don't really see much remorse there. Don't know about you, Catherine?
I do agree with you there. I think the interviews that we have seen with her, she does come across sort of maybe quite cold. I think sort of disinterested is the opinion I'd get. But obviously you don't know what's going through her head. But going back to what you said about her being 15, I think it's quite interesting to look at in this country, the age of criminal responsibility is 10. So if at the age of 10, a child can be held responsible for, say, stealing a chocolate bar, for example, then at the age of 15, shouldn't somebody be held responsible for running off and, as you say, joining a terrorist organisation?
Yeah, surely, like you said, if you can be held responsible for something at the age of 10, why not 15? It's just completely, I think it's a void argument, really. I don't think it makes much sense.
Well, yes, I completely agree with that, and I think that she is old enough to face justice for her actions. She should face the consequences of her actions.
So let's examine the other side of the argument then and have a look at some of the points against her returning to the UK. Obviously, the biggest one here is that she has aligned herself with ISIS, which is a terrorist group that's claimed responsibility for attacks in the UK, including obviously the Manchester bombing where 22 people were killed.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no excuse for it, is there? I mean, I don't see how there can be any justification for wanting to do that. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I don't think she should return, because she has sort of gone against this country and she sort of said, well, actually, no, I don't want to be here, and is supporting a group that's literally attacked our country. So why should she be allowed to come back?
Absolutely. Well, she's made herself an enemy of the country. So another thing is that we don't know what she's been doing in her time with the group. So how are we to know how much of a risk she poses if she comes back? I mean, I think it's safe to assume that she would be monitored if she came back, but even so, it's a bit of a worry for the public, I think, and that's probably why it's gained so much interest and why everyone has an opinion on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, she says she was just an ISIS bride, I believe. But again, how far do you believe what is actually going on? We will never know the truth and the full story of what happened while she was there. And I think one of the main arguments for bringing her back was obviously the fact that she had a baby, and that's the reason why she wanted to come home. Obviously, the fact that her child has now died, that does put a different spin on things. It's just one of those situations where each side has valid points and is a very difficult decision to make, I think.
So let's have a look at what some high-profile figures have been saying about this on Twitter then. Sophie Walker said, bringing Shamima Begum back to face justice and possible rehabilitation is a more effective way to tackle fundamentalism and its impact on women than stripping her of her citizenship, which is a human right. Making her stateless is a political statement, not strategic or thoughtful.
See, that's quite an interesting comment, because it does seem like when they stripped her of her citizenship, it was quite a knee-jerk reaction in some senses, because there'd been such sort of outrage from the public in Britain that she shouldn't be allowed back. And so, knee-jerk reaction, let's get rid of her citizenship. And then afterwards, everyone's like, hold on a moment, you shouldn't have done that. But I think it is a good point that it seems more of a political statement.
Yeah, obviously we have to hope that there was a lot of thought and consideration that went into that decision to revoke her citizenship. But yeah, I get what you mean actually, because there has been such a public outcry about it. It does make you wonder, has it just been done to kind of satisfy the public hunger to see her citizenship revoked?
And that's obviously not the correct reason to make a decision like that. And I think there would be ways to rehabilitate her, like Sophie says in this tweet, that ways to rehabilitate her into society, make her face justice in the UK that would work better. So another tweet that we saw was from Alison Pearson and said the jihadi bride Shamima Begum has had her British citizenship revoked by the Home Office, a welcome move that sends out a powerful signal to those who betrayed the country they belatedly and conveniently decided to call home.
That is very interesting, and that really does make me actually think about the other side of the argument. Of course, a message does need to be sent to show it is not acceptable to go and join a group like ISIS and that you won't be welcomed back with open arms. But obviously, you know, there is a counter argument to that as well, but I totally see where she is coming from there.
Because that's the thing, if they've gone to join a terrorist organisation, like, they could be a threat when they return. So they've decided to go and fight against us. Why now choose to come back?
So this is obviously a very interesting topic, and there's many different sides to the argument, very valid points made on both sides. So if you do want to get in touch with your opinions, we would love to hear from you. You can send us something on our social media or contact us via email.
So, Beth, you've also this month been looking at the topic of abortion. Would you like to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, it's definitely been a really interesting one. There's a lot to be said about abortion. It's a huge argument, and I don't think we'll have time to go into all sides of it, but I've spoken to some really interesting people from both sides of the argument. First, let's have a listen to Dawn McAvoy, who's the co-founder of Both Lives Matter, a pro-life group in Northern Ireland.
We have bodily autonomy up to the point where we can't do what we want with our own body when it hurts another person's body. And in pregnancy, then obviously we have our own child within our body. So that's where private choice then should be limited. Women have trusted us with their experience, and many of them are women who have actually had a pregnancy crisis for whatever reason and felt that abortion, they were either encouraged or felt pressured, or at that point in time they felt, yes, this is the only choice that I have to make. And they've then come to us with their story because of the harm that they have felt because of that decision, the regret that they have.
So Dawn there is talking about women who have had an abortion, but later on they've regretted it and thought that they were actually pressured into that decision. I also spoke to Mara Clark, who is the founder of the Abortion Support Network, which helps people who live in countries where abortion is illegal to travel to the UK for a safe and legal abortion.
Everybody can have their own opinions and their own beliefs around these things, but there is no one higher authority that can make decisions for all of us. You know, so if you got pregnant tomorrow, who would you want to be in control of whether or not you continued that pregnancy? You, with unbiased information from a healthcare provider, the person who got you pregnant, your mom, your dad, Theresa May, the Pope. Who would you want to make that decision? Ultimately, who do you think is empowered, has the right to make that decision for you?
So it's really interesting, this argument, because Dawn obviously is based in Northern Ireland, where the abortion laws are still very strict, and it is impossible to have an abortion unless you have a valid medical reason, unless, of course, you travel to the UK, which is something that Mara helps people to do. So we've got kind of two opposing sides here. Dawn believes that the current law in Northern Ireland should stay as it is to protect the unborn life, whereas Mara believes in bodily autonomy and that it should be your own choice whether or not to have an abortion. So what do you make of this, Catherine? Would you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice?
I think I would definitely consider myself pro-choice. I think that the only person that should have a say in what a woman does with her body is a woman herself. I don't see why anybody else should say, no, you're not allowed to do that, or you can't. I think with an abortion, it's such a sensitive topic, and I think if somebody gets pregnant and say they've been raped and they get pregnant and obviously they don't want the child, or if it's an accidental pregnancy and they're not in the position where they want to have a baby at that moment, why would they bring a child into the world that they know is not going to have a good upbringing and that they don't want? Why is not having that child worse than bringing a child into the world when it's not wanted. And I think if you want an abortion, why should you not be allowed an abortion at the end of the day? The only person it's affecting is obviously you, and it's not got nothing to do with anybody else.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with those points. It was interesting because when I spoke to Mara, she said that a lot of the women that the Abortion Support Network helps to travel to the UK for an abortion are people who actually couldn't afford to do that if it wasn't for their help. So that's quite scary to think that there's women out there who can't afford to come and have an abortion, but if you're rich, then you can kind of do what you want with your body and come and have the abortion that you want. But interestingly, comparing that to what Dawn said, she said that she felt that the reason a lot of people do get an abortion is because they feel that they can't raise a child because they don't have the money to raise them. So even though I am myself definitely pro-choice, it was an interesting argument to hear that some women are worried about not being able to afford to raise a baby and that's the only reason they don't have one. I think it's sad that that's the position in this day and age.
I do agree with you there. I think that money shouldn't have to play such a big role in either decision. It shouldn't play such a role in whether or not you have that child, and it shouldn't play such a role in whether or not you can have an abortion. And I think that it is quite sad that it does have such an impact on something where money shouldn't be the problem at hand. But then on the other side of things, as Dawn was saying, nobody should be forced into having an abortion if they don't want to. She spoke about women that had had abortions that then regretted them. And I think that, obviously, on the other hand, if you don't want an abortion, you shouldn't have to have an abortion. But then the situation with legalising abortion, it's not about forcing everybody to have one. It's more, if you want one, there's a safe and legal way to have one.
Absolutely, yeah. Like you said, it is scary that there are people who won't be able to have children because someone in their life has pressured them into having an abortion. But to me, the idea of not having the option in the first place is more scary. And what Mara was saying is that for the people who really desperately want an abortion and can't get one in their country because of the strict laws, she was telling me about some people who had resorted to really extreme methods to try and self-abort, which obviously I won't go into detail about, but it was really distressing to hear that.
Well, yeah, obviously that's hard to hear about, and I think it all comes back to this thing where making abortion illegal doesn't stop abortions from happening. It just means that people resort to trying it themselves, or there's unsafe practices and methods which can cause more damage to both the mother and the baby. And I think that the best practice is, if you have illegal abortions, the people that want an abortion can have an abortion safely. The people that don't want an abortion aren't being forced into having one.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the only thing I would add to that is that it really did take me aback actually when Dawn told me that there are 100,000 people alive in Northern Ireland today because of their strict abortion laws, and that is quite a stark statistic because it makes you think about those 100,000 people. But also, yeah, I completely agree that choice should be there.
At the end of the day, I think it comes back to what Mara was saying about who you want to have control over your body, and I think it should be the person who's got to live with that decision and not an elected official whose decision won't affect them.
Absolutely. I think I've definitely taken something away from both sides of this argument because I kind of think of what Dawn said about the fact that we need to do better to support women and not pressure them to have an abortion if they don't want to. And something she said as well was to stop pressuring women who are pregnant as a result of rape or assuming that they should have an abortion and that's what's right for them. We definitely need to open up the conversation more and make sure that women feel heard and that they can make the choice that's right for them regardless of what other people think. But like you said, I just don't think that taking the option of abortion away is going to help or solve the situation. I think that choice needs to be there, and I know that if I was in a situation where I was pregnant, I would want to have the choice of an abortion.
So Beth, would you say that your opinion has changed after having these conversations?
I don't think my fundamental opinion that abortion should be an option has changed, but yeah, it's definitely opened my mind up to other viewpoints that, you know, there are women being pressured into having abortions, and we do as a society kind of assume that women who've been raped would want an abortion or it's what's best for them. So I'm definitely more open-minded to the fact that that's the situation now and that shouldn't be happening. But Yeah, my fundamental opinion is that I am pro-choice and I do think that the option of abortion should be there. What about you, Catherine? Have you changed your mind at all?
Well, no, in the sense that I am still pro-choice, and like you say, I think that abortion should be a choice. It should be an option for the people that want it. But I also think that Dawn's raised some interesting points, and that people who aren't in a financial position to have a child but want the child shouldn't feel like they have to have an abortion because of that. I think that's equally as wrong.
Yeah, I think we could both go on talking about this for so long because it is such a huge topic, and we could go on about when does life begin and when is it okay to have an abortion and not, but we've not got time for that today. But we would love to hear from you on social media, so do get in touch with your opinions. If you are affected by any of the issues mentioned, you can contact the National Sexual Health Helpline on 0300 123 7123 or visit the NHS website. Or if you are in Northern Ireland, you can call the Family Planning Agency helpline on 0345 122 8687 for unbiased advice. Moving on to our final topic this time, and it is political engagement. Catherine, do you want to tell us some more about that?
Well, yes, so this week we are looking at young people being involved in politics. So hold tight because the feature is coming this weekend. So far I've spoken to a couple of young Conservatives about their views and why they're involved in politics, but then also why they are Conservatives. So first of all, I spoke to Seth Goddard, who is the president of the Conservative Society at the University of Lincoln.
And to me, it all filters down to my values, to what I value, and to me, I value one thing over anything else, and that is family. And to me, I think that the Conservative Party is based off of values which are those of families.
So Seth there spoke about how family is very important to him, and he feels like the Conservatives really reflect those values. And another member of the society that I spoke to was Ollie Broadhurst, and this is what he had to say.
The main thing for me is that freedom is the most important reason why I'm a Conservative. I believe that people are best suited to live their own lives, that when people have got the freedom to achieve anything, excel, not have barriers to achieve their potential and their goals, that's when a society and individuals can flourish and make the best of themselves.
And the main points that Ollie was raising was having freedoms, and he thinks that, again, Conservatives are the party that best reflect those values for him. And I am looking forward to speaking to some young Labour Party members to see how their views differ, and I think it'll be quite interesting to see the contrast of opinions and see if there's any similarities there. So that will be coming up in the feature, which will be posted over the weekend. But Beth, how do you feel you are engaged in politics?
Well, I must admit, in recent years, I haven't actually felt that engaged in politics. I think with the current situation in the UK at the moment, it is very easy to become alienated from it. So we've obviously had Brexit and all of the drama surrounding it, and we've also had our fair share of general elections in recent years. And I think it's quite easy to feel quite lost because of all of that and to just think, what is the point? So I definitely think there is probably an issue with political engagement in the country right now. How do you feel on the topic?
Well, I'm of the opinion that if you don't vote in general elections or referendums and things like that, then you don't really have a leg to stand on if it comes to complaining. So if you haven't used your opportunity to express your voice when you're given the opportunity, then it's not really fair to then complain about it if you don't like what's been voted in, because you had the opportunity to vote and have your voice heard, but you chose not to use it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, but I definitely have a comeback for that. I do think that the system in the UK is quite flawed sometimes, and it can feel like your vote doesn't matter. I know I've definitely felt like that. So where I'm from, my constituency is a Labour safe seat, and it always has been, and it's a Labour safe seat by a long stretch. So if I wanted to vote for anyone that wasn't Labour, it just feels like a pointless exercise, because it's like I'm just throwing my vote in for no particular reason because I know that it won't get someone elected. And I know that there's the opinion that, well, if everyone thinks like that, then it will never change. But I just don't believe it, because I have voted in a way that isn't Labour in the past and it hasn't changed anything. I don't really align myself to one political party, and I do kind of change my vote, but yeah, I definitely feel like sometimes it just feels like a pointless exercise.
Well, you did just read my mind just then, and you countered yourself with what I was going to say, that if everybody thinks like that, then they should all vote and a change might be made. But I do agree with you that the system is flawed and maybe there are better ways to vote in who we want, but then also I can see the benefits of having the system we have at the moment with a representative for each area, and I think changing the system would be such an overhaul. I don't know, it's one of those ones where it's changing it might be so much that nobody knows what's going on anymore.
See, that's interesting. I personally disagree. I think that we shouldn't really take an attitude of any change is bad change. I think that the thing I would most like to see in politics, the thing that I'm most passionate about in politics, is to see a change to the voting system, because I would feel a lot more engaged if my vote just went into one huge pool, and based off the total number of votes, that's how the number of MPs in Parliament was decided. At the minute, I just feel like unless I move to somewhere where it's a marginal seat, my vote just really doesn't matter.
I do completely understand where you're coming from, and I think a big part of young people getting engaged with politics is the fact that they think that they won't make a difference. But then a few years ago there was a referendum to change the voting system, and I know that it was only one alternative and it's not the only alternative out there, but the turnout for that referendum was actually quite low, and I think it just shows that not many people actually sort of bothered enough to want to change the system, which again I think is quite interesting. But I think there's quite a lot of issues within politics, and I think young people getting engaged is one of the biggest ones. I think the more young people get engaged in politics and actually think, well, this will affect my life and I need to have my say when I've got the chance, then I think things will slowly change.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's so many things to be said about it. I think one thing that comes up over and over again is, ironically, from older people saying that young people aren't interested in voting, but then what do you think of the fact that 16-year-olds aren't able to vote, and maybe if they were, then people would feel more engaged from a younger age and it'd be more spoken about in schools?
Well, I think the debate over 16-year-olds getting the vote is an interesting one, because in some ways you think, would they just sort of do it for a laugh and just put in silly votes and things like this just because they can, because they think it's funny? But then there are people that are serious about politics at a young age and would want to make a difference. But I think one of the key things is, if you want to give the vote to 16-year-olds, you need to teach politics in high school, and don't do it in a way that's, oh, well, I think this, I think that, and have the teacher putting an opinion on it, because obviously having that bias is completely wrong, but doing it in a way as, this is what this party stands for, this is what this one stands for, and this is what this one stands for, this is how the system works, this is how Parliament works, because I think everybody needs that opportunity to know how the political system in this country works, because I know some people older than me that don't really like voting and they don't actually know how Parliament works, and I think that that's so wrong. I think that in a democracy we should all know the basic processes of government and how it actually works.
I definitely agree with you there. I think it should be taught in schools, and more people would be interested in voting then because they would understand what their vote meant. But yeah, I agree, and the only thing I would say is that maybe, like you said, that some 16-year-olds would just throw away their vote and do, whatever crosses their mind, maybe vote for the Monster Raving Loony Party for a bit of a laugh. But what's to say that, a 36-year-old isn't going to do that, really, because there are plenty of people who do that, and saying that a 16-year-old shouldn't have that same right, to me, just doesn't make sense. But yeah, absolutely, it should be taught in schools. That's how we can get political engagement from young people.
Well, of course, we say all this, but some young people do get involved in politics, and heavily involved, and I will be looking at this more in depth in the feature that will be up this weekend, and I will speak to some young Conservative members and some young Labour members.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to that one, Catherine. I think that about wraps it up for this episode of Taboo Talks.
But before you go, make sure you do send in your comments about young people getting engaged in politics and let us know what you think about this. You can do it in the usual ways via Twitter, Facebook or email, and we look forward to reading them.
We've got another Topical Taboo article planned for next week about vaccinations and those who oppose them and don't believe that they work. So I'm sure that lots of you have opinions on that. Make sure to send those in too.
So that's it for this month, and for now it's bye from me
and me.
And make sure you tune in next month for some more controversial topics.